You are another one of his minions, and so yeah, I'm glad to have you on. And I wanted to start with the question that Will asked you to answer at the beginning of the semester when you had him as a professor. And so, um, help listeners, viewers, um, know how the risen Jesus is the only explanation for where in life you are right now.
Yeah. So thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. Definitely a step down from the usual
It's
cast on
not.
the podcast. So listeners beware. But first day of class in Bishop Wilman's class, first day of the semester, first year, and we had to write a paper about, what's your call story? Why are you here? Um, and yeah, there's no explanation for how I'm here other than Jesus. Very long story. Try to make it short.
No. Make it as long as you want.
Well, I'm a Methodist preacher, so born and reared in Methodist church. Born on third base, but would have said I hit a triple and had every opportunity I could have asked for. But just for some reason, it always felt so good to do bad, um, and I began drifting away from the church and had quite a few hiccups along the way. And when it came time for college, I knew I wanted to go somewhere different than anyone in my high school had gone, because I had this idea of kind of rebranding myself, Slice 2.0, where I was not going to drink or do drugs or anything like that. And so I chose Florida State, um, partly because, yeah, it checked the box of far away and somewhere that no other students had gone, but also just in case we need to delay the plan, that was a good place to continue on the trajectory that I was on. So went to Florida State and had this realization as soon as I got out of my parents' car. I looked down and I saw my shadow, and I had
Hmm.
a eerie feeling because it was like no matter where I went, there I was. And I had this idea that, people back home, my classmates, they were all waiting on me to fail. So I thought, well, if I can just build this life full of accolades and titles and positions, then I can prove everyone wrong, regardless of what's happening in the darkness and within me. So got involved in fraternity, started climbing the ranks, joined the interfraternity council. When I was administrative vice president, my job was overseeing charity events. So I thought it'd be a good thing to do a golf tournament and support, organizations like University Police Department, and all the while selling cocaine and other drugs. And when I became president of the fraternity council, I was completely off the end, deep end with the drugs. It's completely out of control. So it's this weird
Had you
time.
had you been dealing drugs in high school too?
Yeah, but it was, like kind of on the low, as the kids say. I mean, people didn't really know about it, but it was just, weed and um, small stuff. But,
So in Florida, you became an entrepreneur.
yeah, yeah, I always had an entrepreneurial spirit about me. And Florida is a wonderful place if you want to um, explore those opportunities, both legally and illegally. So I did. And I'll never forget there was a night where I'd gone to my drug dealer's house and there was, quite a large amount of drugs. And I'd gone to tell him, hey, thanks for this wonderful opportunity. It's been great, but I think, our friendship, our business partnership has run its course. He laughed and threw the duffel bag to me and said, I'll see you in 2 days. And I said, yeah, that's a good option too. And so I was like, I don't know how I'm supposed to move all these drugs. And so I got a meeting with all the fraternity presidents who I knew their chapters were selling drugs on campus. And I said, okay, your chapter's selling drugs. I know that. I have a strict anti-drug policy. And they're kind of like, well, whatever. And so I said, here's how it's going to work. I got two numbers. You can call this number, and this is the number you call. This is the amount you'll get, and this is the price you'll pay for it. Or if you try to continue doing what you're doing and buy it from anyone other than this number, then I'll call this number. And I slid the chief of police's
Hmm.
uh, business card. And so then now I'm like, wow, I cracked the code, I got it made, and continued on. And then my alcoholism, drug addiction, just, alcohol became my master. And I couldn't stop. Every day I woke up saying, okay, today's the day I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to use drugs. And every day was the day I continued drinking and using drugs until finally I went home. I'd gone to the hospital plenty of times. I'd lost like 30 pounds in a month. Everyone's trying to figure out what's going on with me. No one knew about. I had this secret life. And
you told me about ODing, passing out, and falling into your pool, and your mom finding you. Where in the timeline did that happen?
That's about to happen.
Okay.
So went to go home, and day 2 or 3, no drinking, no drugs. Standing in my parents' backyard. I'm saying, I got to go back to school. I got to go back to school. And my body locked, and I fell into the swimming pool, sank to the bottom. At first, my mom said she thought I was kind of just messing around or something. And then she saw me convulsing on the bottom. So she jumped in. This is my mom who just beat cancer. So she jumped in trying to get me out. I don't remember any of this, but she said she would swim down to the bottom and try to pull me up. And my body was convulsing so hard she couldn't get a grip, and I was too heavy to lift up. And she said every time she came up for air, she would scream, help me, Jesus, help me, Jesus. And it was about 2 minutes, and she came up one last time holding me. And she was convinced she was holding, her dead son. And she looked, and she saw 2 sets of feet. And there were 2 guys who happened to be playing golf behind. And they said afterwards that one of them, the only reason why they were there playing so late was that one of them had stopped on the turn at 9 and talked to his wife. And she said, you're playing too much golf. He said, well, let me just finish this round and then we'll talk about it. And so, of course, he was like, hey, this is proof why I should keep playing golf. But when they pulled me out of the pool, they said my lips were blue, my skin was gray. And the first thing I can remember is being in an ambulance, and it felt like I got stabbed in the heart. And I remember sitting up going, and then the next thing I remember was them saying, blood pressure 70/30, we're losing him again. And I don't remember anything until I was in the hospital. And in the hospital, they're trying to figure out what's going on. So they did EEG, EKG, CT, MRI. And finally, the doctor cleared the room and said to me, all right, we need to talk. And she said, look, you have no history of seizures. Your family has no history of seizures. All the tests came back negative. So there's really only one explanation for this. That's drug and alcohol withdrawal. How often do you drink and what drugs do you use? And I said, I don't drink and I don't. And that's what she did. And she's like, sir, I'm going to remind you, you were brought in here basically dead a couple of days ago. You were very combative. Your body was shaking until we gave you drugs. So how can you explain these drugs in your system? And so I said, well, ma'am, you just told me. I mean, I can see on the board morphine for the pain and Xanax, calm me down, all this. You have poisoned my body. I don't use drugs or alcohol. So, frankly, I'm pretty upset. And she said, well, I can't help you. You need to leave. So I was like, that sounds good to me. And I texted my buddy and said, hey, I'm heading back to my parents' house. Here's a few items for you to get while you're out running errands. And I was back to it again, secretly, drinking, in my bed after, I'd go to bed. Just a miserable way to live until one day there was a knock at the door, and it was 4 police officers. And they said, they were local cops on a neighborhood drug complaint. They wanted to know, if I had any information. And so, I gave them my Eddie Haskell spiel about, I'm Mr. Goody Two Shoes at Florida State and, hang out with the president of the university and blah, blah, blah. So I'm giving them my whole spiel. And the whole time they were calling me James, but there was one officer who didn't say a word. And he was just sitting there staring at me. And finally he interrupts me and he says, Slice. And I just looked at him because I was like, uh-oh. And he said, my name's Garrett Williams. I'm a DE agent from Florida. I got warrants for your arrest for trafficking cocaine. You have the right to remain silent. So my mom fell to the ground crying. And in that moment, there was this strange dichotomous sensation of, oh my God, my life is over. And thank you, God, this is finally over.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's like it's just a good, like Romans 7, the one thing I don't want to do, I do.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean,
every day. I don't think Paul was referring to cocaine, but yeah. Yeah.
Well, I don't think he was quite as personable as you either, but, so yeah. All right. So you get arrested and then what?
So, that was an interesting day because, they made all these promises to my mom about this is very, it's going to be very discreet. We're aware of the neighborhood. No one will know all this. They got me in the car. They pulled out and there's like roadblock, all these cops. Then they take me out and then they switch cuffs and they put me in. And so had to go down to county jail in Charlotte and got bailed out of there after a couple days and then had to get extradited to Florida because I was on a fugitive extradition warrant. Essentially, they thought I was on the run because they had my phone tapped and someone had called me and said, hey, the guy you left your drugs with and, when you went back home and the keys to your apartment, he's actually an informant. And,
Oops.
And I was like, well, it's okay. And I kid you not, I said that day, I said, it's okay. I'm done selling drugs. He said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to be a preacher. And he was like, what? Because, it's important to note my earliest memory of a calling, I was 10 years old shooting baskets in the driveway, pretending I was JJ Redick, and threw up a 3, bricked it, went running to get the ball before it rolled down the hill. And I grabbed the ball and I just heard a voice say, you're going to be a pastor. And I remember both how I felt and what I said, 2 things that stuck with me for a very, very long time, which was, no, I can't. I'm not good enough. And, had that memory, but then it was, let's get back to what we were doing. So it was kind of funny because it's like, that wasn't me that said that. So I remember afterwards, I'm like, why would I be a preacher? Like, that's crazy. And so after I came back from Florida, it was right before Thanksgiving. And my parents said, we need to go to a psychologist. And my dad had a friend who was a psychologist. And we went to him. And I remember at this point, Jason, I'm still lying. Drugs weren't mine. It's a case of mistaken identity, which was my story until the DEA showed me a video clip of the undercover purchase where the guy said to me, like, are you oh yeah, I'm Slice Penny, I'm president of IFC. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's me, but it's tough to tell with the hat. And so
how did your parents react to the arrest and everything?
Better than I would have.
Did they know your problem was as severe as it was?
No. When I tell you, like, nobody, like my ex-girlfriend didn't even know. She found out by watching the news at her sorority house. And very, very, very few people knew. And that's one thing about alcoholism and addiction is that, it's an isolating disease. And so, as the remonstrances of my friends continued, like, okay, I'll just cut you off. And so what went from, always being at the fraternity house then became living alone. Because it's like, well, I can do my drugs and drink without people criticizing me or telling me I need to stop. And as soon as someone had a problem with my drinking and drugging, well, now I have a problem with them. So, I'd become somewhat of a lone wolf by the end. My parents' response, I would say there's no other word besides love. But it was tough love. You know what I mean? Like, it was what I needed. But they were shocked. They were hurt. They were afraid. They were anything that any parent would be when they find out, their child is not only in serious trouble legally, but physically, mentally, emotionally. I'd had near-death experience. And of course, I'm still lying. And so in the psychologist's office, we're discussing what's going on. And, I'm being real obstinate and non cooperative. And so my mom began telling the story of me falling into the pool. And I just, the walls around my heart started crumbling. And I hung my head and, I started crying. And the psychologist said, wait, I want you to say that again, but Slice, I want you to look your mother in the eye.
Mhm.
It says that. And I looked down and I shook my head. And he said it again. And my father, who really hadn't said much the last couple of days, I mean, he was just doing what needed to be done and making sure everyone was okay. He looked at me and he said, Slice, look your mother in the eye right now. And I did. And when she said it again, she made it about halfway through. And I fell to my knees. And again, it wasn't me. I don't know where it came from. I threw my arms out and I said, God help me. And they said, okay, what does that mean? And I said, it's true. And they said, what's true? I said, everything's true. I said, I'm a drug dealer, but I'm a drug addict. I'm an alcoholic. I can't stop drinking and using drugs. I don't know what to do. And, the psychologist said, okay, here are some things, for you to do, get some help. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It wasn't really the alcohol as much. It's more the drugs that are the issue. I don't think I need to stop drinking. He was like, no, no, no. It's all or nothing. And so, I went and got help. And that was the beginning of my journey. But my parents said, okay, well, we need to get, you need to get back into church too. Because I hadn't been to church, a long time. And my first Sunday back in the church was one of the lowest points of my life.
How so?
Well, I walked in, full of shame, full of guilt, full of fear. And I could feel the judgmental stares. I could hear the condescending whispers. And then, a guy I really looked up to said some pretty hurtful stuff about how he was so disappointed in me, he was disgusted, angry with me. And I freaked out. I think I had, what most would call a panic attack. Never had one before. Now, at his defense, I was, coming off of quite a bit of drugs and Xanax, stuff like that. But nonetheless, I mean, I was shaking and crying, couldn't breathe, hyperventilating. So I came back upstairs outside the sanctuary.
Just to make sure people listening, like, that's a church fail.
Yeah.
So don't make the Slices of the world feel that way.
Yeah. And came back upstairs. My mom was standing there. And she's like, what's going on? And I said, if this is the church and this is what God's all about, I want nothing to do with either. I said, this is the last time I'll ever step foot in a church. And she was like, don't say that. And she said, before you give up, let's go to a different church. I said, what's the church? She said, St. Mark's. I said, where's that? She said, it's on the other side of town. You've never been. So I acquiesced. I mean, one, because I'm a Southern mama's boy, so naturally, I'm gonna do as she says. But two, I was like, you know what? We can cross this off our to-do list, and I can get back, to live my life. I mean, I was getting sober at this point, trying to live spiritually, but I was kind of in the phase of like, okay, spirituality, yes, religion, no. And so we went the next Sunday. We got to the door, and this guy greeted me. His name's James House, and I'll call him Uncle James. And said, I'm so glad to see you, gave me a hug, all this. So we go and we sit down in the pew, and I said to my mom, who is that guy? And she said, I think he said his name was James. I said, yeah, but how do I know him? She was like, what? I said, how do I know him? She said, well, sweetheart, I don't think you do. You just met him. I said, no, I have to know him. She said, why? I said, did you not hear what he said and how he treated me? She said, well, that's how Christians are supposed to treat people. So I was like, huh.
How did your mom choose that church?
She had some connections through UMW, I guess now,
Okay.
Women in Faith. And so she knew it was just going to be something totally different. And it was. And it's exactly what I needed. And the choir got to singing, and I was crying. The preacher got to preaching. And to this day, I couldn't tell you what the scripture was, what the sermon was about, but I'll never forget what I felt. And it was like something needs to change. And there's something or someone that wants me to change. And I went to go up to the altar, but my legs were like cement. I couldn't walk. And people helped me, and I just broke down crying. And, I reaffirmed my faith that day. And that was, in some ways the beginning, but in other ways, the continuation of a lifelong journey in faith.
So how much time transpired between that moment to your conviction?
About 13, 14 months, maybe.
Okay.
And, that day they had the book where it's, if you're a guest and do you want to visit with the pastor? So I checked yes on that box. Now, mind you, I don't have a cell phone because the DEA have it as evidence. Obviously, I have nothing going on in my life because my life is in shambles. But the pastor reaches out. I put down my mom's cell phone, and he's like, would you have any time? Would you have any availability? It's on Monday. Do you have any availability to meet with me? And I was like, well, I got to check my schedule and see. I got no driver's license, no car, no job, nothing going on. And he said, you know what? Let's do this. He said, how about you just can you be here in 30 minutes? I'm gonna move some things around. And I went, and that man met me where I was, and he helped me, when I couldn't help myself, and he explained to me, the real Jesus, and because I was convinced that God would want nothing to do with anyone like me. I mean, how could a God want anything to do with me when I don't want anything to do with me? And he said, well, actually, Jesus, you're kind of like exactly what Jesus was looking for. And so again, that continued me on this trajectory that I had no idea I was on.
So talk about going back to Florida then.
Yeah. So right before I went to prison, I was working a construction job, and I was terrible at my job. Hated my job. Just, like I said before, I'm trying to emulate Jesus. Jesus was a carpenter. There's areas of my life where I feel like, okay, I can say at least I'm making a valiant effort in imitating him. Carpentry, I was not at all a follower of Christ. I was so bad they put me on demolition, and then I even messed that up. They said, whatever you do, don't touch this wall. And then they come back, and the whole wall's missing. They're like, that's the one wall you weren't supposed to touch. And so right before my boss, he had a sudden tragic death in his family. His 2-week-old daughter died. And it was in that time where suddenly I'm no longer on job sites. I'm at the hospital, or I'm clearing out their daughter's nursery. I'm taking their son trick-or-treating, praying with the family, talking to them. And I called my pastor, Otto Harris, the guy who helped me so much. And I said, I got to talk to you. I said, something's wrong with me. And he said, okay, what's going on? So I told him. And he said, do you think God's calling you to the ministry? And I said, I'm sorry, what? And he said, do you think God's calling you to the ministry? And I'm like, are you even listening to me? Something's wrong with me. And he's like, no, are you listening to me? Are you listening to God? Like, sounds like God's calling you to the ministry. And I said, okay, well, that's nice. Well, I'll let you go now. And because I just talked to my attorney, and, he said, you got about 2 weeks until you go to prison. So I was like, cool, he's going to forget about this. I can get on with my life, and it'll be great. My attorney had told me I would go to a minimum security faith-based work camp. And he said, it's not going to be like sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya, but there'll be no fences. It'll be white collar crime, nonviolent. And, that's what it'll be like. And I was like, all right, cool. I got sent to a maximum security, maximum level site camp, deadliest prison in Florida, Santa Rosa. And I'll never forget
So
being on the bus.
why did you end up there instead of
Well,
the
I
camp?
found out about a year and a half later that there was a clerical error, and I was labeled an illegal immigrant with a ICE hold for deportation. Um, and so, I mean, when my parents came to pick me up, I mean, they had to bring the passport, everything, which birth certificate, which ironically enough, I had to surrender when I was on pretrial release because they thought I was international flight risk because I had studied abroad in Spain and made some friends there with the locals and was still in touch with them. So they said I was going to, flee the country. But, um, I go to this prison and I'm like, God, what are you doing? Like, just help me to have faith, to trust and believe,
How
that
how frightened were you?
beyond, you know, um, I would say it's like kind of like if you took a house cat and threw it in a jungle with the lions. It's about how I felt. Um, and so I knew there's no way I can survive this without God's grace and mercy.
Hmm.
Um, and I mean, when I look back over my life, I mean, my life as a whole, the way I was living, but especially, in prison with all the violence and stuff that was going on around me. And it was like, how am I alive? How am I okay? Now, and it's nothing but God's grace. Um, I prayed one night asking God, okay, why am I here? You know. And a couple nights later, I had this dream. Um, and when I got to Santa Rosa, I met this dude, Ricky Goldsmith. Ricky's been in prison now for 24 years for a murder he didn't commit. And Ricky preaches on Sundays, from the pulpit, but Ricky preaches every day on the compound with his actions. And we became fast friends, took me under his wing. And so I was praying that night, God, why'd you bring me here? And in the dream, I didn't see anyone. I just heard a voice say, I brought you here so Ricky could get you through prison and you could get Ricky out of prison.
Hmm.
Ricky fulfilled his end of the bargain and then some. There was one day I was canteen orderly, where you get your food and hygiene and stuff like that. Canteen had been shut down for a while, and I'm the new orderly. Well, I go to set up, and then they tell me, hey, you're going to go deliver canteen to the 24-hour lockdown dorms. And I was like, oh, well, what about, open pop? No, we don't care. So I just follow the order. I go. Now, all of a sudden, I don't know this, but on the rec yard where all the inmates are, they're talking about, I mean, it was like the first day in the history of the prison that all the gangs were finally in agreement on one thing, and that was that I had to go. It was basically like arguing over who was going to stab me first.
Why?
And so didn't know any of this. But apparently Ricky went to the front of the line and said, look, this has nothing to do with him. That's the officers, making the rules. Y'all are acting crazy. But if anyone has a problem with him, you have a problem with me. So if you want to handle it, we can handle it right now. Ricky made no mention of this. To this day, he's never mentioned that. But truly saved my life. An old timer named Nacho told me, and he was like, you need to understand something. He said, that man's more of a friend than you'll ever understand. He said, when you get out of here, short timer, don't you ever forget him.
Hmm.
And so God's opened up some doors now where we have a legal team representing him finally. We really believe he's going to be able to come home soon. But I was amazed in prison because I thought, okay, Jesus, we had a good run. It was the 14 months, like, you really helped me, and I loved you, and you're great, but I know you're not going to be anywhere near this prison, so I'm gonna do what I got to do to survive. And it was like I got there, and Jesus was just standing there waiting for me.
Hmm.
Um, And some of the best worship services I've ever attended in my life were in the prison. Some of the best Bible studies I've ever been part of were in that prison.
Well, I mean, he literally promises to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, and some of the best people I ever met were in prison. You know, you'd never guess it, but it was in prison that, you know, God really changed my life, changed my heart. You know, it was a double serve and a humble pie. And it wasn't sweet to eat, but it's been nourishing, you know, after. And it was kind of like my 40 days in the wilderness, and a lot of temptation, a lot of trials, a lot of fear. But, you know, Ricky was big on praying without ceasing. And, you know, as a good Methodist, you know, pray before I eat, pray before I go to sleep, pray when I wake up, you know, that's a lot of prayer, right? And so Ricky taught me, no. Before you go to work, you say a prayer. Before you walk to work, you say a prayer. While you're walking to work, you should be praying. When you get to work, pray before you start your job. You know, and so then, I mean, it's truly all throughout. We're going to go work out. All right, we got to pray first. We're going to play basketball. Okay, we need to pray first. No matter what it was. And, you know, I had 3 years of real spiritual formation. And it's funny when I look back, 3 years in prison and then 3 years of divinity school. And it, you know, I truly believe my 3 years in prison were for spiritual formation, the heart knowledge of God, and my 3 years of divinity school are for the head knowledge of God. You know, the intellect, the understanding.
Okay, so you mentioned divinity school. So you were locked up for 3 years.
3 years.
And then you get out. And
yeah.
Where's your path go then?
So I came home and living at my parents' house, you know, going to church, working, doing what I can do, and taking classes at Central Piedmont. I came home and I was like, the last thing I need to do is, you know, continue on with school. I need to get back to work. And a guy, JJ McCarran, who was at Central Piedmont at the time, he reached out to me and said, you know, let's get lunch. And he told me, you know, I got a new job while you were gone, and this position allows me to give a scholarship to a student every year. I'm like, well, that's cool. And he's like, yeah, I want to give that scholarship to you. And I just broke down crying. Because again, I'm like, this is nothing but God's grace. You know, I'm the last person who deserves it. And so I started taking classes at Central Piedmont, really enjoying it. And then my first Sunday, you know, home at the church, Bishop Leland was there. And they gave me a Bible and, you know, said, do you have anything you want to share? And I don't remember what I said. I remember feeling the Holy Spirit moving. And afterwards, Bishop Leland asked me, is God calling you to be a pastor? And I said, oh, man. And I said, yes, sir, I believe so. And he said, well, I do too, but don't listen to me, Slice. I'm just a man. You keep listening to God. But I'll be in touch. You know, there's some opportunities for you, you know, student pastor. And I'm like, but I'm just at the community college, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not divinity school, anything like that. Well, the community college reached out to me and said, hey, you know, if you're trying to get a 4-year degree, you need to transfer out of here because you have to do 2 years at a university in order to graduate. So I said, okay, well, I think I'll go to FIFA. You know, it's United Methodist School. It's centrally located, you know, in Charlotte, just right in the heart of all the areas of my life. I'm like, this is perfect. Reached out to them. They said, okay, what graduate program are you? And I said, no, I'm still undergrad. And she said, oh, well, then you need to go to Meisenheimer. I said, well, where's that? She said, well, it's about an hour from Charlotte. I said, well, that won't work, you know, with schedule and everything. I could spend all my money on gas. So I said, can I have a couple of days to pray about this? And she said, sure. but I do want to let you know, like, the deadline's rapidly approaching. I said, okay. So reached out to people trying to find other options, and it just seemed like every door was closing. And I just kept feeling like God's calling me to Pfeiffer. But I'm like, I don't know how this is going to work. A couple of days after that, my phone rings. It's David Hockett, who was the district superintendent at the time. And he said, Slice, you've been approved to be a lay pastor. Now, my jaw's on the floor because part of the application was a background check, which I was personally offended by because you had to pay $50 for it. And I'm like, I could save myself $50 and you all a bunch of time and just give you a spreadsheet, PowerPoint, whatever format you prefer, with all the details you need. But he says you've been approved and you've been appointed. So now, I'm really shocked. And he said, you've been appointed to Locust United Methodist Church. And I said, oh, wow, where is that? He said, it's in Locust, North Carolina. And I was like thinking, well, same question. Where's that? and I remember thinking like, wow, this is now 2 new towns in North Carolina in a week that I've just learned about, Meisenheimer and Locust. And he tells me, Slice, I'm trying to think how I can describe it, what it's near. He said, Slice, do you know where Pfeiffer University is in Meisenheimer? I said, uh-huh. He said, well, it's about 15 minutes from there. And oh, by the way, the church's main request is that you'll live in the parsonage. And so, I hit mute and I'm like, yes. And he said, do you think you'll be okay with that? I take it back off mute. I said, yes, sir. Let me think about it. I'll see. But, I'm definitely interested. In that moment, I believe God was giving me the courage to step out on faith because, how do I put it? Well, I don't imagine there are too many United Methodist congregations when they meet with the DS to discuss what are you looking for in your next pastor, and they say, we really want a 26-year-old recovering drug addict and alcoholic who's just come home from prison, still living at home with his parents, taking classes at the community college. That sounds just perfect for us, but that's what they got. And, it was a priceless opportunity.
How did they receive you?
Well, I am supposed to speak the truth in love. The first thing they said to me was they asked if they could get a picture of me, which I thought was a little strange. And they said, yeah, we just need to send it to the other church members. We were afraid you were black because, your church is a black church. And I said, is that a problem? And they said, well, no. We don't have any problem with black people. We just don't want a black pastor. And I said, okay, but you're okay with a 26-year-old recovering drug addict, alcoholic, who lives at home, community college, fresh out of prison. That makes sense. So, it was interesting. Stanley County, where I live, they were proud of 2 things. They were the least vaccinated area per capita in the state of North Carolina, and they had the highest population who voted for Donald Trump in the election. So to me, it's like, hey, this is a great opportunity to minister. If I'm for real about Jesus and I'm for real about following him, hey, let's ride. And so, there were some amazing people there. There were some people who really, really helped me grow in patience and love and tolerance. But it was one of those experiences where I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's kind of like prison. Best thing that ever happened to me that I don't want to ever do again. But
that's great.
Yeah,
that's great. So how did you end up at Duke?
God's grace, but more specifically, I was at Pfeiffer taking a couple of religion courses, and Dr. Kevin Taylor, he was talking to me about applying to seminaries, and he said, where are you going to apply? And I was thinking, small, maybe just do remote stuff like that. And he said, forget that. this is what I want you to do. I want you to go home, make a list of all the schools you won't apply to. Bring it back to me tomorrow. I said, okay, that'll be easy. Number 1, Duke. Number 2, Yale. Number 3, Princeton. And he said, okay, here's your list. I said, what do you mean? He said, this is the list of schools you're going to apply to. I said, you're kidding. He said, far from it. And it was interesting. He said to me, you know, there's 2 things you need to understand. Number 1, with law school, medical school, business school, it's very competitive, but the competition is students for the schools, students trying to get in. He said, with divinity schools right now, attendance is down, applications are down. He said, so right now the competition is more between the schools.
Mm-hmm.
I said, oh, I didn't know that. And he said, yeah, it's a good opportunity for you. And second, with your background, they would shred your application at a business school, law school, med school, pretending they have no connection to you. He said, but at divinity school, he said, that's one place in the world where they would actually take that as a positive. And he's like, so tell your story. And I did, and I was blessed to have a lot of people, support me in the application process. Bishop Leland, Bishop Carter, and Dr. Bullard, who was president of Pfeiffer at the time. He had gone to Duke Divinity, and he was actually Dr. Hauerwas's TA for 2 years. And he took me up there, and when we did the tour, he had picked the date and let me know, and it was the anniversary of my sobriety date. So at the time, it was like when did I go to? So it was like, my 6-year sobriety anniversary. And as soon as we pulled up, I just had goosebumps. And I told him, I said, this is where I need to be. And I remember thinking, like, it's going to hurt when they don't let me in, but man, would it be cool if I could go here. And I was just enamored by everything. And
you told me that sometimes you cry on the way to class.
Oh, that's like every day. Yeah, I know. I used to think I was like a tough guy for, never crying and, oh, yeah, I'm a man. Now I'm like, no shame. I just got my headphones in, gospel music blaring, just crying, and people are looking at me. And it's like, man, if you knew what God's done for me, you might cry too. Because people like me don't really belong at a place like Duke,
I remember it was a class when I was in seminary, a class on the parables.
Yeah.
And Donald Jewell, a Lutheran, was teaching on Luke 15, and he asked everyone in the class to raise their hands if they were the eldest sibling, and it was almost everybody in the room. And so I'm wondering, do you ever feel like the prodigal son in a room full of elder brothers?
Yeah. I also feel like the least qualified, least well-read, least intelligent person in a room full of brainiacs. But, I've been blessed to have friends who are very, very smart. Can you hear me?
Yep, no worries.
I don't know. It just crashed. I switched my laptop now. It should be better. Are we live?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So yeah, my best friend at divinity school, Hendrawan Wajoyo, guy from Indonesia, and we met first day and, figured out we have a lot in common, even though we're totally different. I mean, he's off the charts, smart. There's not much he hasn't read or written about. But, you know, there are a lot of times with my classmates where I'm like, yeah, I know that y'all understand systematic theology and hermeneutics much better than I. However, a lot of the stuff that Jesus or Paul, you know, is speaking about, like, I feel like I understand or relate to in a way that, you know, you don't. Um, but to me, that's part of the beauty of, the body of Christ at large. And, United Methodist Church with the connectional nature. I mean, at General Conference, I was in a class and we went, and some of my classmates, I'm looking over at them. I mean, they got the headphones in, they got the binder, they're taking notes, and they're saying if this doesn't pass, then it'll go to this, and then there'll be a revote and a motion. And I'm like, oh my gosh, look, there's Adam Hamilton. Or, wow, look, there's David Hawkins. That was my first DS. And there's Dan Pizzette, my third DS. But I was like, you know what? How cool is it that there's someone to do everything? And It's funny when you said about being in the room full of feeling like the prodigal son. The second or third week of Bishop Willman's class, we're sitting there and he's going off, how he does and talking about Paul. And he said, but you know what the problem is? None of you can actually relate or understand or appreciate what Paul's talking about because none of you has been to prison. And then he went to take a sip of his coffee, realized it was empty. He said, okay, now's a good time for a break. And then he went to shuffle out, and I went to go to the bathroom, and I hear my name. I turn around, and it's him, and he's summoned me over. And he said, he said, I owe you an apology. And I'm like, wait, you owe me an apology? It's like the Godfather Methodism. I'm like, why would you apologize to me? And he said, I've just gotten so used to having a room full of pansies at this school that I forgot that you've actually been to prison. So just please forgive me. And one of the classmates said, wait, did he just call you a pansy? I said, no, I think he called you a pansy.
So what's it like, so you have a year left, right?
Yeah.
So what part of ministry or seminary do you find most life-giving?
Oh, that's a good question. I love field ed. For those who aren't familiar with that, Duke's setup is, you take your in-class academic classes, and then during the summer, it's a full-time 10-week placement at a church, and in the school year, it's kind of reversed, 40-week, 10-hour, 20-hour a week placement. But for me, that's been a wonderful opportunity to get to apply what I've been learning. Some of this stuff where I'm like, why am I staying up late, waking up early, reading about Augustine and Aquinas and all these different people. And then it's like, oh, so now when this, little prepubescent, pimple-faced kid at youth group says, so what is the Trinity? I don't know. I went to summer camp and they said it's like an egg. And I said, it's not. But also, I mean, having come in with 2 years of ministry experience, it's like, wow, thanks to Duke, I'm fully aware of how unprepared I was as a minister. And I'm like, I used to, we live streamed off my Facebook page, and I completely deleted Facebook because I was like, if anyone at Duke sees these sermons I used to preach, finally they'll realize, yeah, we made a big mistake with this guy. There was a clerical error, like he cannot be a student here. And just being able to apply what I've learned. And I got to do a year at a church in Roxborough, Long Memorial, and I couldn't have had a better supervisor, Ed Priest staff. I mean, he went above and beyond to pour into me. And I preached my Aunt Susie's eulogy last September, and there was a day, and we had a bunch of meetings and all this going on, and I was kind of telling him about it, and he just stopped what he was doing. He said, "You know what?" He looked at the clock. We had a big meeting in about 20 minutes, and he said, "Why don't we go in the sanctuary and just do a run through of the eulogy?" And I was like, "Are you serious?" And he was like, "Yeah." And of course, the feedback he gave me, I made the changes, and after the eulogy, the only compliments I got were on the changes that he had suggested, which was really cool. But I mean, I love getting to see the diverse people. I got friends from Indonesia, Colombia, South Korea. I mean, truly international, all denominations. Getting to hang out with people who are smarter than I am, getting to, hang out with people like Bishop Williman and Dr. Strawn. Duke
So
does
what's
a lot of speaker lunches, a lot of free food. I like it.
so what's it like now? So I met your parents in Charlotte last month,
Yeah.
and your mom is so proud of you. What's it like to go from that isolating shame to just being the object of just pure pride?
It's interesting. I mean, sometimes those feelings, when I was the 10-year-old shooting baskets, sometimes those will pop back up. I dealt with imposter syndrome a lot early on at Duke, Um, but I mean, I can't take credit for the good things in my life. I know it's nothing but the grace of God and the power of Jesus. Um, so, I don't let my arm get tired from patting myself on the back. I just try to keep my knees sore, thanking God, for being in this position. When you talked about the prodigal son earlier, I thought about my older brother because, you know, I think the older brother in that parable, he kind of gets neglected. And, I think if you ask my brother, he could probably feel like that some because my brother's always been great. I mean, he never messed up. He never did stupid stuff like that. I mean, just a smart guy, a great guy. Um,
Are you guys close?
we're really close. Um, and he couldn't have been more supportive throughout it all. And now, and you know, um, if it hadn't been for the podcast, you would have been saying the same thing about my mom and my brother because he's got twin girls and they just turned 2 and they were actually born 100 days premature, and the doctor said they weren't going to live. Um, and now my brother is like the epitome of a girl dad and just killing it, work and his wife and his daughters. And so, he gives me a good example, as I prepare to get married, um, for what I want to be like. But he never was critical of me. I mean, he didn't really understand. Um, this is kind of funny. He did ask me how long had I been snorting crack, so I had to explain to him the difference between crack and cocaine. But beyond that, I mean, it was nothing but love. So that's part of why I said to start with my family. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better family. I just couldn't have been a worse son and brother.
So what was it more difficult for your fiance to accept that you were going to be a minister or that you were an ex-con?
Well, luckily for me, both were put on the table immediately because I met her like the Sunday of my very first sermon.
Okay.
So you know how it is, like in American society, it's like, what do you do? Where'd you go to school? All that. And so it doesn't take long for people to start calculating, wait a second, this guy's 26, but he's still in college. Like, okay, Van Wilder, like, what's the story? And so then, it naturally comes out. So I actually tried to push her away with both because I quickly realized she's the first woman I've ever truly loved. And that scared me to death. and the feelings of unworthiness creeped back in. Um, but one of the many ways God showed me this is who I have for you was when she just basically told me, "Okay, would you stop? You know, like you're not going to push me away." Um, she's. I mean, I'm biased, but I think she's a phenomenal, future pastor's wife. I mean, she loves people, she loves God, she loves church. She plays the piano. I mean, like I said, I on paper am not who church are looking for, but on paper for pastor's wife, I mean, she checks all the boxes. She can cook.
So speaking of churches, do you is there something that you think churches should know about how to make someone like you feel welcomed?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, a lot of churches have the signs out front, everybody's welcome and all that. And then, I mean, just for example, this past week at Field Ed, it was first time going to the Bible study class on Wednesday morning. And I came in and I kind of half jokingly, but half dipped my toe in the water, said, "Now I know I'm new, but I'm not new enough to United Methodist Church to just sit in an open seat. So if I sit here, am I taking someone's seat?" And the woman said, "Uh-huh." I said, "Okay, thank you. Good information. Where should I sit?" She said, "Sit over there." So I did. Sit there, got my coffee, got my Bible, and from behind me I hear, "Uh-oh, somebody's in my seat." So I said, "Well, that must be me." And she said, I said, "Well, I'm sorry, ma'am. Forgive me. Where should I sit?" And then I look, there's one or two seats open. And then I see in the corner of the room, away from the table, there's a seat. And I said, "How about I just go sit over there?" They said, "That'd be fine." So then the preacher comes in and he's like, "What are you doing? Sit at the table." And I just think that's kind of illustrative of what happens in a lot of churches. People with "that's my seat," um, or, you know, not really greeting or making people feel welcome. I mean, when I was in Locust, we had a new family come, and then it was like the woman had an incredible singing voice. We had a choir of one, and I was like, "Wow, would you like to sing in our choir?" It's now a duet, and they people were complaining that they've only been coming for a couple weeks, so she shouldn't be allowed to sing in the choir yet. And I said, "Oh my gosh, now what page of the Bible? I mean, what page of the Book of Discipline? What chapter of the Bible? What book of the Bible?" So I think the best way to make people feel welcome isn't so much what you say; it's what you do.
Hmm.
You know, when you see them, do you kind of just stare at them as they walk by, or do you scoot over, which says, "Hey, you're welcome to sit here, and you're welcome to sit next to me, regardless of who you are." Um, if someone comes in who looks, talks, smells, acts differently, what do we do? Um,
That's good. Yeah, it's easy in churches to make something other than the main thing, and then your behavior kind of deteriorates.
yeah, and I mean, there's no better way to upset a lifelong Methodist than to sit in a seat. You know,
Well, Slice, we like to end the podcast with the 10 questions from inside the actor studio. And so, what is your favorite word?
my favorite what
Word.
word? Grace. I know you want something deep, but
No.
yeah.
What's your least favorite word?
Hate
What turns you on?
turns me on, like sexually.
It's just however you want to interpret that question.
Oh well, June 29th when I'm married, soon to be Penny. Uh, but in this sense, I would say what turns me on is the opportunity to tell people about Jesus.
Okay. So you're getting married in a month?
Get married in a month,
Okay.
but who's counting?
All right. Well, I will wait for the invitation. What turns you off?
Closed-minded people, negative
What,
people.
what's your favorite curse word?
Well, I don't curse anymore. I had to give that up in prison. Um, so I don't.
Okay. All right. I will not push you on that one. So are there, oh, never mind. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, no, I mean, I know you and Bishop Willman will let them fly, which I'm cool with. It's not me. I just personally made the decision where it was like, if you've lived how I lived and just everything was awful, then it's like, okay, I don't need any area of my life to convince people that I'm still like who I was.
Oh yeah, no, I was just thinking back to when I was a prison chaplain, and just there's a whole other lexicon of words that exist in the prison that people you don't hear other places.
That's how I justified not taking Greek or Hebrew. I already am familiar with prison dialects, so I've met my quota.
What sound or noise do you love?
My niece saying Jesus.
What sound or noise do you hate?
People grunting in the gym.
I hate the dudes who like drop the weights like on the floor. It's so annoying.
There's a guy in my gym. He's a thorn in my flesh. I'm sure he's a nice guy, and I pray for him constantly. God help me view him the way you view me. However, he does like 15-pound dumbbells. He's like, he slams them. And I'm like, come on, bro. Really? I can't even hear my music or my podcast. It's just messing up my vibe.
I'm the guy who sweats all over the treadmill. That's
cool.
me.
As long as you wipe it down.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt one day?
Well, I've attempted sales, and that didn't really pan out. I like writing. Maybe one day I'll write something.
What profession would you not like to do?
Oh gosh, there's so many. Like, I could never be an accountant. Really, anything that doesn't involve people and requires to like sit alone in front of a screen, and I'm not good at.
Since heaven exists, what do you want to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Good job, my good and faithful servant. Yeah, and I hope God tells me that other people, came to faith because of me witnessing. Because I know for a long time, a lot of people went to the darkness because of my witness to it. So now I really, I got, like all Christians, I got a debt I can never pay, but, God's placed a calling on my heart to minister to the people who I used to be, the people who are hopeless, feel helpless, who feel unworthy, unlovable. That's my concern. That's kind of, what turns me on is the opportunity to tell those people and to show those people the love of Jesus Christ.
That's great. Yeah. Well, thank you, Slice.
Thank you, Jason. It's been fun.
Yeah, so don't log off yet.
All right, I won't.
I'm gonna press stop.